Moving on to topic number 9, NBA Finals picks. The NBA playoffs are in the middle of round 1 right now. We're Celtics fans. We don't want to talk about the Celtics because of what's going on. I just don't. That's the most I'm going to talk about the Celtics this entire show. So NBA's Finals picks. We're going to make our picks, Brandon. I'm going to let you go first. Who do you got coming out of the West and who you got coming out of the East?
Oh, man, I'm going to start with the East because I think it's easier, to be honest. And I think it's going to be the Nets, and they've been proving it in this first round. Unfortunately, against our Boston Celtics. I know you don't want to hear it, but it's just really one of those things where none of the games have even been close so far. And it's like the Nets are really proving how strong of a roster they have right now. And it's crazy because I would say their 5th best player, arguably, in Joe Harris, was lighting the Celtics up last night and dropped, I believe, 26 points. So it's proving that how deep their roster is. And like you said, when Dinwiddie comes back, he might arguably be better than Joe Harris. And I'm a big Joe Harris fan. I think he's always flown under the radar, and he's obviously been one of those pieces that the Nets have refused to move on when they've acquired all these other guys. And they made the right move, clearly, in keeping Joe Harris, and he proved it last night by lighting the Celtics up. And honestly, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden didn't have to do too much, and they still blew the Celtics out. So it's really one of those things where I think the Nets are going to be unstoppable right now going forward in the playoffs. I'm expecting them to arguably, it might sweep the Celtics. The Celtics might take one game. If Jason Tatum can drop a 50 or a 60 piece, I think they could take one game. Other than that, they might get swept. And then it's just, can maybe the Bucks or the Heat or one of these other Eastern teams maybe be a thorn in the side of the Nets, but I just don't really see it happening. So I've got to pick the Brooklyn Nets to come out of the East. And out of the West, I think it's a lot tougher of a conversation. Obviously, it was good to see the Lakers bounce back last night and tie the series up with Phoenix. But I think that's going to be one of the best series, honestly, this first-round series between the Lakers and the Phoenix Suns. But then my dark horse is the Portland Trailblazers with Dame time. Okay, I love Dame Lillard, so I'm always going to bring up Dame Lillard in the Western Conference. But I think it's really one of those things where the Trailblazers could be the dark horse. But watch out for Utah. Honestly, Utah was the number 1 seed. They've had a great season. I love their coach. He's having a great season. He's arguably going to be the coach of the year. And then, honestly, you have to look out for, like I said, the Trailblazers. I think the Trailblazers and Utah and then the Lakers. But if I have to pick one, which I know you're going to make me, I think I'm going to have to go with the Los Angeles Lakers. I think they proved that they bounced back last night against Phoenix. I'm expecting them to win this series, and hopefully they can get LeBron a little rest going into the Western Conference Finals. Because I think if they can get out of the Western Conference Finals, I think they'll have, obviously, a great chance of winning the title. Even against Brooklyn. But I think it's really one of those things where I think the matchup that everybody wants to see is Brooklyn versus the LA Lakers anyway.
Yeah, if I had to bet on it, I'd probably say Brooklyn and Los Angeles. Lakers, of course. But I hate to say it, as a Celtics fan, Brooklyn and LA, it just gives me a bad taste in my mouth. But I think those are the 2 best picks. But I'm going to go with 2 other teams in the NBA Finals because it makes a better show. But no, I actually think in the East, Brooklyn I think is the favorite right now, but I'm going to pick the Sixers. And this probably sounds crazy because we've been watching the Celtics beat up on the Sixers in the playoffs over the past few seasons. But if you look at the Brooklyn Nets, who I think the Sixers are going to meet in the Eastern Conference Finals, I think it's, unless Milwaukee just has an awesome series against the Nets. The Sixers are up 2-0, I believe, right now. No, they're up 1-0 on the Wizards right now. I don't see why they wouldn't win in 5 and maybe even sweep the Wizards. And then they play the winner of the Knicks and the Hawks, 2 young teams that have no experience in the playoffs. So now you're facing, you have probably a relatively easy series against the Wizards. Then you face a very young team who neither team really has the size to contend with the Sixers. Because you look at the Sixers, they have a ton of size. You got Embiid, who's 7 feet. You got Simmons, who's 6'10", plays like a point guard. You have Tobias Harris, who's 6'8", a lot of bulk. He's a small forward. Then you have these wings in Danny Green and Seth Curry and guys on the outside who complement the bigger guys and the bigger scorers so well that I don't see how any of those teams can contend with the Sixers until you get to the Eastern Conference Finals. Then when the Sixers go up against the Nets, the Nets don't have a big guy to cover Embiid. Kevin Durant's not going to cover him. So who do you have to cover Embiid? I mean, DeAndre Jordan, now that they don't have Jared Allen anymore when they made that trade midseason, you don't have a guy that you can throw at Joel Embiid. So I'm not sure who's going to stop him. Ben Simmons can probably, the Sixers might say, Ben, go cover Kevin Durant, because that would be the guy that I would put on him. They're both about the same size. Simmons is such a good defensive player. Can't shoot a lick. He's the opposite of Kevin Durant, but he's a great defensive player. That's who I put there. And then you have to figure out, who's going to stop Harden, I think, is the biggest conversation. Tobias Harris is not the greatest defensive player, so I don't know who you would put there. They do have Matisse Thybulle coming off the bench, a long 6'7" athletic wing, who I think they might be able to put on James Harden. So I think the Sixers, I'm going to pick them to defeat the Nets in the Eastern Conference Finals. Then in the West, this is tough. The only reason why the Lakers won't get there is if they're not healthy, and that means Davis, and that means LeBron, and if they don't have a third guy emerge. Dennis Schroeder just hasn't really played great so far in the playoffs. So they have to have another guy kind of step up. Last year, crazy enough, Rajon Rondo stepped up for the Lakers last year. So we'll see if there's another guy that can step up, be the third player to both LeBron and Anthony Davis, and we'll see if those two guys are healthy. That's a lot of ifs. The season started very quickly after last year's season ended. It's been a condensed schedule. Both those guys missed a lot of time during the regular season. I'm not going to count on those guys staying healthy. So if I had to pick a team, I'm going to pick the Suns. I know it sounds wacky. You need Chris Paul to stay healthy, but if Paul's healthy, you have that veteran who just is hungry for a championship, who's never won a title, and Chris Paul, he's towards the end of his career. He's got a lot of playoff experience. You have a Devin Booker, who the Suns played pretty well in the bubble last year, trying to get into the playoffs. And then you have DeAndre Ayton, who, as long as he plays average to a little bit above average, you have a really solid team. Mikal Bridges. Now you're talking about a team who's got some talent, with guys who know their roles on that team, who can possibly get it done. So I'm going to say it's going to be the Sixers and the Suns in the NBA Finals.
No, I think those are both great picks. And, out west for Phoenix, I love watching Devin Booker play. So I think that's great. And, man, Ayton has really developed as such a young player in the middle there as well. And then I think your pick for Philadelphia, I think it could be possible, because I think you're 100% right. They have nobody to match up with Joel Embiid. And honestly, there's not many teams in the NBA that have many people that can match up with Joel Embiid. He's arguably one of the best centers in the game with Anthony Davis, I'd say. So, yeah, I mean, that's great. But I think the one thing, too, is I don't know if Philadelphia has anybody that can match up with Kyrie Irving. And that's the thing. When Kyrie Irving turns it on, the other night he was turning it on, and he had people in a wash machine and then pulling up for jumpers. So it's just really one of those things where he can turn it on at any point in time and prove just how great of a player he is. And remember, he's hit big shots in the playoffs. That big shot when he was in Cleveland to win the title, and I believe it was Game 6 or Game 7 against the Golden State Warriors. So it's like, watch out for Kyrie Irving in these playoffs. And honestly, watch out for Joe Harris, because if Joe Harris can light it up and drop 26, then you don't really need much out of your stars. They've just got to kind of chip in. And when you got your fourth or fifth best player dropping 26, that just proves how great your roster is. But quickly, one last shout out before we move on to topic number 10. I want to give a shout out to Trae Young for dropping that big game winner in Madison Square Garden to silence the Knicks fans, man. I could watch that all day long. That was such a great shot by such a great player, and I'm really looking to see what else goes on in that series as well.